You carry a weight that no one around you seems to feel. You look at the people by your side, at work, in your family, in the neighborhood, and you see that they move through life in a lighter, simpler way, without that persistent feeling that there is something greater happening, something you still cannot fully name. And in your most honest moments, the question you perhaps have never verbalized aloud arises with force. Why does life feel more intense for me than for most? This question is not weakness. It is not exaggeration. It is not anxiety without cause. It is the first sign of a truth that will change, starting today, the way you view your own history. You were built differently. And everything you have always interpreted as a flaw, the sensitivity that seems like too much, the battles that do not cease, the loneliness that persists even in the middle of a crowd, the doubts about your own worth, is not evidence of a weak character. It is the mark of a strength that is being forged within you, with a precision that your rational mind does not yet grasp. Stay with me until the end of this video. What you will discover here is not empty motivation. It is a reorganization of your entire history, because when you truly understand who you are, nothing will keep you small again. Let us begin at the beginning, with what you feel but probably never knew how to properly explain. There is an experience that has marked the lives of many people over the age of 35 in Brazil. It is that feeling of always being one step out of rhythm, of feeling too much in a society that values emotional anesthesia, of being deep in a culture that rewards superficiality, of caring about things that seem not to matter to most, and the most distressing part, wondering if this way of being is a gift or a burden. Researchers at the University of São Paulo, in studies on emotional processing and temperament, have identified a phenomenon that affects between 15 and 20% of the population worldwide, and which in Brazil has an especially marked expression, given the cultural context of high socioeconomic pressure and rigid family expectations. This phenomenon was initially studied by the North American psychologist Elaine Aron and was named sensory processing sensitivity. In simple terms, the nervous system of these people processes information, emotions, and stimuli more deeply and in more detail than average. They perceive nuances that others ignore. They feel with more intensity. They lend attention to what most discard as irrelevant. But here is the problem, and pay attention to this because it is exactly where the confusion begins that may be keeping you stuck. In a society that equates strength with hardness and sensitivity with weakness, these people spend their entire lives trying to erase precisely what makes them extraordinary. You learned, probably still in childhood, that feeling too much was a problem. Someone, a father, a mother, a teacher, a religious leader, a partner, taught you, with words or without them, that your emotions were excessive, that you needed to swallow it, toughen up, stop exaggerating. And you obeyed. You built armor. You learned to turn down the volume of what you felt to fit into the spaces where you needed to be accepted. But here is what no one told you. You were not strengthening yourself by doing that. You were betraying the architecture of your own soul. If this touched something in you, I want to ask you one thing before continuing. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, click the subscription button now. Because everything we are going to build together here is a long-term work, and you will want to be present for every piece that this puzzle will reveal. Now let us enter the deepest layer. Because science explains the phenomenon, but spirituality reveals the purpose behind it. There is a Hebrew word that appears repeatedly in the scriptures, and which most English translations reduce to a single meaning, losing all the depth it carries in the original. The word is chazak, in Hebrew, hazak. It appears, for example, in the book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 9, where God instructs Joshua, "Be strong and courageous." But the translation, "be strong," does not capture the totality of what chazak means in Hebrew. Chazak is not the strength that is born from the absence of difficulties. It is not the strength of one who has never fallen. Chazak is the strength that is activated precisely by the act of holding firm when everything around is giving way. Hebrew lexicographers describe chazak as the act of seizing something with vigor, of sustaining pressure without letting go. In other contexts in the Old Testament, this same word is used to describe the act of repairing a breach, of restoring what was broken, of strengthening what was weak. Think about that for a second. The same word used for to be strong in Hebrew is also the word used for to repair what was broken. This is not a lexical coincidence. It is a theological revelation. Your strength does not come despite your brokenness. It comes through it. The pressure you felt did not deform you, it calibrated you. And there is a biblical character whose story illustrates this in a way that will make something move inside you. His name is Gideon. When the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon in the book of Judges, chapter 6, he finds a man who is threshing wheat inside a winepress, a place for pressing grapes, hidden from his enemies. It is an image of someone who lives bowed down, camouflaged, operating well below his potential out of fear. And it is exactly at this moment that the angel greets him with words that seem completely disconnected from the reality Gideon is living. "The Lord is with you, O mighty warrior." Mighty warrior, to a man hidden in a winepress trembling with fear. Gideon's response reveals everything about the psychology of one who has never been recognized in the right place. He immediately begins to list his reasons for not being who God is saying he is. "My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. In other words, I have solid proof that you are wrong about me. And here is what needs to go deep into your consciousness today. God was not being kind to Gideon. He was not being encouraging in the superficial way that self-help culture often presents. God was revealing a reality that already existed, which Gideon simply was in no position to see from the place where he was, bowed down, hidden, convinced of his own insignificance. This is exactly what is happening to you now. You are inside your own winepress, a space of safety that has become a prison, convinced that your reasons for self-limitation are valid, that the size of your family, your bank account, your education, your past failures justifies remaining bowed down. And meanwhile, there is a voice, which is not that of cheap motivation, but of something much older and deeper, calling you a mighty warrior. The question that remains is, will you continue arguing with this voice, or will you begin to listen? If this content is reaching where it needs to reach, I want you to like this video now. It is not just a number. Each like helps this channel deliver this message to more people who, just like you, need to hear this today. Now I need to talk about something that probably caused you a pain you have not yet fully processed. The doors that closed, the people who left, the opportunities that did not materialize, the relationships that ended without an explanation that sounded reasonable. You interpreted all of this as loss, as a sign that something was wrong with you, as evidence that you were not good enough, capable enough, loved enough. But what if I told you that each of those losses was, in fact, a precision surgical operation? Researchers at the HeartMath Institute, an American institute dedicated to the study of coherence between the heart and brain systems, discovered something that spiritual traditions have known for millennia. The human heart processes emotional and relational information prior to the rational brain. Before you rationally understood that a situation was toxic to your growth, your inner energy field was already responding to it. The discomfort you felt, that feeling that something was not right even when everything seemed fine on the surface, was not neurosis. It was intelligence. It was your inner system telling you that what was there was not compatible with who you were being called to be. The doors that closed did not close because you failed. They closed because they were not on the right path. Moses understands this better than any character in sacred history. 40 years shepherding sheep in the desert of Midian, long after having been raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, long after having seen up close the highest standards of power, culture, and wealth of the ancient world. 40 years in a life that, to any external observer, would seem like a resounding failure, a diminished life, a lost identity. But what was happening in those 40 years? Moses was being detached from an identity that was not his, the identity of a son of a system of oppression, the identity of someone who owed his status to the structure that enslaved his own people, so that Moses could become the deliverer, the man who would part the sea in two and lead an entire nation through the crossing. He needed to go through the process of letting go of everything he thought he was, to finally discover everything he truly was. The desert was not Moses' punishment, it was his university. And the desert you passed through, or in which you still are, is not proof of your exclusion. It is proof of your preparation. Now I want you to do something. In the comments below this video, write the word unwavering. Just that. It is a declaration, an anchor, a way to fix in your consciousness what this video is activating in you. And I want to read it. Every comment that appears there tells me that this message reached where it needed to. There is a word in the Greek of the New Testament that underwent a drastic reduction in the process of translation. The word is dunamis, in Greek, dynamis. In our Bibles, it usually appears as power, but dunamis is not power in the political or positional sense, the kind of power that comes from a job, a title, a hierarchical position. Dunamis is inherent power, power that exists as an intrinsic quality of something, regardless of any external recognition. Hellenists use this word to describe the potential capacity of something to perform what is in its nature to perform. The seed has the dunamis to become a tree. Fire has the dunamis to burn. The true musician has the dunamis to create music, not because someone gave them that power, but because that capacity is embedded in their constitution. When Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, about him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, the word used is exactly dunamis. And notice the structure of the sentence, the power that is at work within us, not the power that comes from outside, not the power that is granted by some external authority, the power that is already operating within you now as you watch this video. The question is not how you will acquire this strength. The question is how you will stop blocking the one that already exists in you. Because this is where Paul enters with a personal experience that transforms this abstract idea into something concrete and verifiable. No identity transformation in recorded history is more radical than that of Saul of Tarsus, the man the world later knew as Paul. We are not talking about a superficial change in behavior. We are talking about someone who persecuted and approved the murder of Christians, who witnessed the death of Stephen, the first Christian martyr, with declared approval, and who became the greatest communicator and theologian of the movement he previously tried to destroy. But what makes Paul's story even more relevant to what we are discussing today is not the drama of his conversion on the road to Damascus. It is what happened afterward. In chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians, Paul mentions something that biblical commentators have debated for centuries, a thorn in the flesh. Whatever the specific nature of this thorn, and there are many theories, what Paul reveals is that he pleaded with God 3 times to remove it. 3 times. And the answer he received was not the removal of the thorn. The answer was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." My power is made perfect in weakness. In Greek, the dunamis becomes perfect, complete, mature, at the exact point where your natural strength ends, at the point where you reach the limit and discover that you no longer have your own resources. The thorn was not an obstacle to Paul's purpose. It was the instrument for deepening his dependence on something greater than himself, and paradoxically, the vehicle through which the strength operating in him became more visible, more tangible, more powerful. Researchers at UNIFESP, in studies on psychological resilience in adults who faced significant trauma, identified a phenomenon they described as post-traumatic growth, a reality that contradicts the popular narrative that suffering only destroys. In studies conducted over years with Brazilian populations from different socioeconomic strata, those who went through the most intense processes of pain and who developed tools to process them, whether psychological, spiritual, or communal, presented significantly higher levels of life purpose, clarity of values, and the capacity to positively influence their relational contexts than those who had not gone through equivalent pressures. Science calls this post-traumatic growth. Paul called it the power that is perfected in weakness. The name is different. The phenomenon is the same. Now I need to tell you something about the process you are living, or that you have already lived, and that probably no one explained to you with enough clarity. You are not being destroyed by the pressure. You are being sculpted by it. There is a fundamental difference between destruction and sculpture. Destruction is random. It has no intention, no final form, no purpose beyond fragmentation itself. Sculpture, on the other hand, looks like destruction from the outside. The marble is struck, split, chipped, until a form emerges that was not visible in the raw stone, but which was always potentially there, waiting for the chisel. Every night of loneliness you crossed was a stroke of the chisel. Every relationship that ended and left you facing questions you preferred not to face, a stroke of the chisel. Every project that did not work out, every public or private humiliation, every moment you felt the ground giving way beneath your feet, a stroke of the chisel. Each of them was removing a layer of false identity. And what is false identity? It is the identity built upon the approval of others. It is the version of you that learned to exist so as not to disappoint someone, a father, a mother, a spouse, a religious institution, a social group. It is the you that learned to diminish your own voice so as not to generate conflict, that learned to make your own dreams small so as not to seem arrogant, that learned to suppress your own perception so as not to be seen as eccentric, difficult, too complicated. This false identity is not malice, it is adaptation. It is the survival system that children develop in environments where being too authentic generated punishment, emotional, relational, or physical. And this system was brilliant in the context in which it was created. The problem is that you grew up. The context changed, but the system continued to operate, applying the survival rules of the past to the present. And this misalignment is what generates much of the anguish you feel. The Federal Council of Psychology, in data published on the mental health of the adult Brazilian population, points out that the age group between 35 and 55 is where there is the highest rate of silent identity crisis, the kind that does not appear in clinical diagnoses, but manifests as a diffuse feeling that the life one is living is not completely one's own, that there were detours on the path, that there is some version of oneself that was left behind. This perception is not depression, it is lucidity. It is the sign that something in you is ready for the final sculpture, for the removal of the last layers of what is not you, so that what is genuine can fully emerge. Before continuing, activate the notification bell now, because in the next video on this channel, we are going to enter into something that will directly complement what you are receiving today, about how to recognize and inhabit your real identity in daily life, in your relationships, in your financial and spiritual choices. Do not be left out of this. Now we reach the point that is the heart of everything. What to do with all of this? How the strength that is within you, which was forged, which was always there, begins to operate consciously in your life. The first thing that needs to happen is a change of reading, not of your circumstance, of your history. You probably have a narrative about your life that functions as a series of losses, failures, and detours. A narrative where the main character, you, is someone who tried, did not succeed, tried again, suffered, lost people, lost opportunities, and arrived here carrying an inventory of wounds that have not fully healed. This narrative is not wrong in the facts, it is wrong in the interpretation. The same set of events that, read from one perspective, tells the story of someone who suffered more than they should have, read from another perspective, reveals something completely different. Someone who was subjected to an intense formation process, who developed capacities that only develop under pressure, and who reached this moment of clarity with inner resources that most people who lived a quieter life simply do not possess. Deep empathy does not develop without pain. Genuine wisdom does not develop without error. Real compassion, not the performative compassion of social networks, but the kind that looks into the eyes of someone who is breaking and knows what to do, does not develop without a personal crossing. You have all of this. You paid the price for all of this. And now the time has come to recognize what you possess, instead of continuing to lament what you lost. Researchers at Fiocruz, in studies on subjective well-being and social cohesion in Brazil, identified that one of the greatest predictors of perceived quality of life in adults over 35 is not income. It is not education level. It is not marital status. It is what they termed sense of narrative coherence, the ability to look at one's own history and find in it a thread of meaning that connects the past to the present and points to a possible future. When you can read your story not as a series of accidents, but as a process with purpose, when you stop seeing your sufferings as execution errors and begin to see them as necessary components of your formation, something reorganizes internally. It is not an illusion. It is not surface positive thinking. It is a cognitive and spiritual reorientation that has measurable effects on neuroplasticity, the immune system, and decision-making capacity. The second thing that needs to happen is a repositioning of your sensitivity. You need to stop apologizing for the fact that you feel deeply. You need to stop treating yourself as a problem for perceiving what others ignore. You need to stop diminishing your intuition, that internal voice that frequently knows before the rational mind can process, as if it were exaggeration or emotional immaturity. Studies from the HeartMath Institute demonstrated that the heart possesses a semi-independent nervous system, with approximately 40,000 neurons capable of processing and sending information to the brain, not just the other way around, as was thought until a few years ago. This cardiac system especially processes relational and emotional signals, and in people with high sensory processing capacity, this information pathway operates with extraordinary precision. What you call intuition has a neurophysiological substrate. It has a measurable basis. It is not superstition. It is advanced biology. And in the field of spirituality, this same capacity has a name that resonates with what God said about those he sets apart for himself. The Hebrew word Gibor, in Hebrew Gibvor. Normally translated as mighty warrior or hero, Gibor in the Old Testament describes not just physical strength, but a combination of vigor, valor, and excellence of character. It is the word used in Proverbs 31 to describe the virtuous woman, a woman of Gibor. It is the word used in Isaiah 9 verse 6 to describe one of the titles of the Messiah, El Gibor, mighty God. This is the fabric of which you are made. Not the noisy strength that needs to announce itself to be recognized, not the power that depends on public approval to exist, but the Gibor, the quiet excellence, the valor that emerges when it is necessary, the firmness that does not bend even when everything around is giving way. The third thing is what changes the game in practice. You need to begin to act from your real identity, not from your current circumstances. Gideon, when he finally accepted the call, had no trained army, had no conventional military resources, had none of the prerequisites that someone from the outside would have required to involve him in a national liberation project. What he had was the certainty that he had been called, and this certainty became the foundation upon which he acted, with an army that God deliberately diminished from 32,000 to 300 men, so that no one could attribute the victory to human strength. Moses had no eloquence when he returned to Egypt. He himself admits that he was slow of speech and tongue. What he had was the memory of an encounter before a burning bush, and the awareness that he had received a mission that was greater than his limitations. Paul did not have the relational credentials that would have facilitated his acceptance among the first Christians. After all, he had persecuted and approved the death of some of them. What he had was an experience of transformation so radical that the evidence of it was irrefutable to anyone who lived with him long enough. The common denominator is not perfect competence. It is not favorable circumstance. It is not the absence of limitations. It is the consciousness of identity operating from the inside out. And this is the inversion that needs to happen in you. Instead of waiting for your circumstances to change for you to begin acting like who you really are, instead of waiting for approval, the resource, the right moment, the absence of fear, you begin to act from who you are, and the circumstances respond to that action. This is not naive. It is not a disconnection from reality. It is the principle that quantum physics, cognitive psychology, and biblical theology describe with different languages, but with the same foundation. The internal state of a system influences the configuration of what the system attracts and encounters in the external environment. Or, as the scriptures put it much more directly, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. There is something I want to tell you directly before closing this video. Something that is not rhetoric, not a formula, not a motivational script. You made it here. Not just to the end of this video, you made it to this moment of your life, with everything it cost you to get here, with the nights you crossed alone, with the choices that weighed heavy, with the versions of you that were left by the wayside because they could not manage to continue. You arrived, And this fact, the simple and concrete fact that you are here, is not trivial. It is the physical proof of a resilience that you have not yet learned to see as the extraordinary resource it is. Because most people who faced what you faced either broke completely or hardened in a way that closed them off to everything but immediate survival. You did something different. You kept feeling. You kept searching. You kept wondering if there was more. This movement, this refusal to resign yourself to the lesser part of yourself, is the mark of what the scriptures call the chosen. Not chosen in the sense of superior. Not chosen as a distinction over others. Chosen in the sense of set apart for something specific. Called to a function that required a formation that hurt. Prepared by a process that looked like destruction, but which was, with every stroke, the work of the craftsman upon the material he knows better than anyone. The strength you always sought outside, in validations, in approvals, in external achievements that, when they arrived, never fully filled the space they were supposed to fill, was always within you. It is not loud. It does not need a stage. It does not depend on an audience. It is a serene firmness that begins to operate when you stop looking for it where it never was, and begin to recognize it where it has always been. And with this perception, your outer world also begins to reorganize. Not because circumstances magically change, but because you change the way you navigate them. Because you stop asking for permission to be who you are. Because you stop apologizing for the depth that inhabits you. Because you begin to treat your spiritual radar, this sensitivity that distinguishes you, not as a problem to be managed, but as a gift to be exercised. You have no idea who you really are, but you are beginning to, and that changes everything. If this video touched something in you, if something here made sense in a way that goes beyond the intellectual, share it with someone who needs to hear this today. You do not need to explain. You do not need to contextualize. Just send it, because sometimes the right message arrives by the hand of someone who cares enough to pass it on. And you can be that person for someone who is in the dark now, exactly where you have already been. I will see you in the next video. And when you get there, I guarantee that what you will find will make sense in an even deeper way than what you received here today.